There's a silence that falls after the end of a war. A silence thicker than smoke, heavier than the blood still drying on forgotten fields. You stood there once, didn't you? Alone in the ruins they left you to navigate, breathing in the bitter scent of everything they thought they could take from you. Betrayal curled around your ankles like mist. Rejection clung to your skin like a second, unwanted flesh. You were a battlefield disguised as a person, and no one even stopped to notice the wreckage they caused. They smiled as they walked away, leaving behind ruins they never intended to look back on. They thought you would collapse, crumble, disappear quietly into the dust. But you didn't. You stood still, heart pounding like distant war drums, fists clenching invisible swords you chose not to swing. The fire inside you never died. It retreated. It crouched low, waiting, simmering like coals beneath a thick blanket of ash. They mistook your silence for surrender. They mistook your restraint for weakness. They never understood the kind of power it takes to hold destruction in your hands and choose to keep it there, tight and trembling, instead of setting the world ablaze. You could have burned it all down. You knew how. They handed you the matches, drenched the ground in gasoline, and then dared you to be better than the worst parts of yourself. And you were, even when no one was watching, especially when no one was watching. That is the part they'll never understand, the weight of what you could have done, and the greater weight of choosing not to. You walked through that wasteland they made of your life with your head high, your back straight, and your hands steady. Every step you took was a refusal, a rebellion, a reminder that they could break your heart, but not your character, that they could humiliate you, mock you, abandon you, but they could not make you like them. They could not drag you down into the pit where they lived, clawing and cursing and calling it power. Number You held something different, something older, something stronger, the kind of strength that doesn't advertise itself, the kind that doesn't need an audience to know it's real, power that breathes in the silence, watches from the shadows, and grows in the quiet places where no one else dares to look. You stood among the ruins and built yourself a throne from the rubble, not because you wanted to rule over them, but because you refused to be ruled by the things they did to you. Every scar, every tear, every sleepless night became a stone beneath your feet, raising you higher while they remained trapped in the games they tried to play with you. They thought they could define you by the worst moments they forced upon you. They were wrong. The battlefield they left you on became your proving ground, not a place of defeat, but a place of forging. Where they saw ashes, you saw raw material. Where they heard silence, you heard the beginning of a new song. You didn't scream. You didn't lash out. You didn't crumble. You became. And somewhere deep down, in the parts of them they refuse to acknowledge, they know. They know what you could have done. They know you had every right to be merciless, to carve your anger into their bones, to leave them shivering in the same cold they left you to survive. And yet you didn't. You didn't, because you are not built from the same brittle pieces that shattered them. You didn't because you are not fueled by the same smallness that defines them. You didn't because true power isn't loud. True power doesn't need to announce itself with explosions and ashes. True power waits, watches, smiles with a mouth full of storms and chooses peace, not because it must, but because it can, because it understands that to destroy would be easy, but to rebuild, to resurrect, to outlive, that is godlike. And you are so much closer to divinity than they could ever dream of being. The battlefield is silent now. The smoke drifts away on a wind you summoned by your own survival. You stand alone. But you are not lonely. You are something more, something inevitable. You could have destroyed them. You could have shattered their worlds the way they shattered yours. You had every reason, every weapon, every right. But you didn't. And that says more about you than they will ever have the courage to understand. There are wounds that never bleed, but they carve deeper than any blade ever could. You know those wounds, don't you? You carry them, stitched invisibly into your skin, stitched with trembling hands that no one ever sees. They smiled when they cut you. They laughed when they buried the knife under layers of civility and soft-spoken betrayals. They dressed up your pain in politeness, handed it back to you gift-wrapped in false apologies and hollow words. And you, heart cracked, but still beating, had to find a way to walk away without dragging your own soul behind you. They think you forgot. They think the silence meant healing. They think if they smiled brightly enough, pretended long enough, the past would rewrite itself. But pain has a memory longer than any lie they can tell. Pain remembers the nights you sat awake, shivering under the weight of everything you weren't allowed to say. Pain remembers the tightness in your chest when their laughter echoed just loud enough for you to hear, when their absence spoke louder than their promises ever did. You became a vault of silent screams, a museum of moments you couldn't explain because the world loves the visible scars and dismisses the invisible ones. They want to see blood, but what you bled was spirit, and no one clapped for that. No one mourned that loss. They left you standing in rooms where you weren't wanted, sitting at tables where your name was only spoken when you weren't there to hear it. They sharpened their words in secret and smiled at you over glasses of wine, pretending the air wasn't thick with the stench of betrayal. There were days you questioned your own worth, nights you wondered if maybe, just maybe, you were the problem after all. Because when enough hands push you away, you start to think you were made to be abandoned. When enough voices mock you behind closed doors, you start to wonder if you were born to be the joke. They didn't just stab you once. They did it 1,000 tiny times, until even you began to hold the blade against your own skin just to feel something familiar. The villain wasn't always them. Sometimes it wore your face. Sometimes it spoke with your voice. Sometimes the cruelest whisper came from inside you, asking if you were really worth the fight, asking if you deserved to stand at all. Doubt wormed its way into your veins, a slow, relentless poison fed to you one half-smile at a time. They handed you the poison, but you swallowed it yourself, didn't you? Hoping it might make you more lovable, more acceptable, more worthy. But listen to me, that voice inside you, the one that tells you are too broken, too ugly, too much. It is a liar. It was born in their mouths and planted in your heart, and it has no claim on you. It never did. The truth is, they hurt you because they recognized your power before you did. They saw something wild, something untamable in you, and it terrified them. So they did what small people do. They tried to tame it. They tried to shrink it. They tried to convince you to destroy yourself so they wouldn't have to lift a finger. Every false smile was a blade. Every backhanded compliment was a trap. Every time they called you sensitive, dramatic, too much, they were laying another stone in the prison they wanted you to live in. But here you are, breathing, walking, refusing. They thought you would die a quiet death, smothered under the weight of your own second-guessing. They thought they could wound you so deeply you would forget how to fight. They thought wrong, because pain may have a memory, but so does power. And somewhere deep inside you, beneath the wreckage, the power stirred. It stirred when you chose to get out of bed, even when your chest felt hollow. It stirred when you smiled in the mirror, even when you didn't believe it. It stirred when you said, "Enough," even if your voice trembled as you said it. It stirred when you stayed kind, stayed soft, stayed human, when cruelty would have been so much easier. You held the line. You stayed standing. And that infuriated them more than any revenge you could have plotted. Your very survival became a kind of rebellion. Your unwillingness to break became a mirror they couldn't stand to look into. But the truth is, you still carry the wound. It pulses on quiet nights. It aches when old memories slip through cracks in your defenses. It hums like an old song you wish you didn't know the words to. And that's okay. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. It makes you forged. You are the living proof that a soul can be torn, burned, betrayed, and still refuse to turn to ash. You are the living proof that light can survive being smothered. You are the evidence that hope doesn't always shout. Sometimes it barely whispers. But it still lives, still breathes, still waits for its moment to roar. They think you forgot, but you didn't. Every time you see their faces, you remember. Every time their laughter reaches your ears, you remember. Every time the old doubts creep up your spine, you remember. But now, when you remember, you don't crumble. You don't apologize for surviving the fire they lit. You don't shrink into the shadows they built for you. You stand, you breathe, you continue. And that is the kind of victory they will never be able to steal from you. Tonight, you sit with the wound open. You trace its edges. You acknowledge it. You don't run from it. You look it in the eyes and say, "I see you. I remember. And I'm still here." You stare into the abyss they left inside you. You stare into the darkness that they thought would consume you. You feel the weight of everything you've lost, everything you've carried alone. Your fists clench at your sides. Your teeth grit against the howl rising in your throat. And yet you do not fall. You do not fall. Not tonight. Not ever again. There was a time you almost let it happen. Don't lie to yourself. You stood at the edge, didn't you? Hands trembling, heart pounding like a war drum in your chest. And for a moment, a long, brutal moment, you wanted to burn it all down. You tasted the smoke before the fire ever caught. You built the pyres in your mind. You stacked every insult, every betrayal, every humiliation like dry kindling, and you imagined what it would feel like to strike the match. You could have. You could have. You could have. You could have turned your silence into sirens, into alarms that no one could ignore. You could have called down storms with a single scream. You could have made them see, made them hurt, made them kneel. You could have shattered every illusion they built for themselves. You could have destroyed their reputations, their peace, their fragile little kingdoms built on lies and shadows. You could have made the earth shake beneath their feet. And oh, how tempting it was. Because anger is a sweet fire. It promises power. It promises clarity. It promises the kind of justice the world is too cowardly to deliver. You carried that anger in your chest like a live grenade, feeling it rattle against your ribs with every memory, every slight, every whispered betrayal. You carried it like a second heartbeat, a secret drumbeat that said, "Destroy, destroy, destroy." You stood in the wreckage of everything they tried to break in you, and you gathered the ashes into your palms. You shaped them into weapons. You sharpened them into swords. You built an arsenal out of your suffering. You could have drawn blood with nothing but a glance. You could have summoned destruction with a single word. You could have. You could have. You could have. You could have leveled the ground they walked on, made them taste the bitterness they fed you for years. You could have exposed every lie they told, every secret they whispered in the dark. You could have become the nightmare they never saw coming. You could have made yourself the storm they would never outrun. You were ready to turn your silence into sirens, ready to unleash every scream you swallowed, ready to tear down the walls with the sheer weight of your rage. You were ready to take the fire they fed you, bite after bitter bite, and hurl it back at them tenfold. And they would have deserved it, make no mistake. They earned every ounce of wrath you bottled up, every sleepless night, every broken piece of trust, every tear they never saw, or worse, saw and ignored. They deserved the fire. They built it themselves, brick by hateful brick, thinking you would never find the strength to strike back. But you did find the strength. And that, right there, that is where the story could have ended. In ashes, in ruins, in glorious undeniable vengeance. You could have. But something happened, didn't it? Somewhere between the first spark and the final match. You paused. You hesitated. Not because you weren't capable. Not because you didn't crave it down to your marrow. You hesitated because you realized that destruction is a hunger that never fills. You realized that vengeance, no matter how justified, is still a chain you have to carry. And you were already tired of carrying things that didn't belong to you. You saw it clearly, for one brutal gut-wrenching moment. The truth no one else talks about. Righteous wrath and reckless destruction wear the same face until you look them in the eye. And you, standing there with fire in your hands, looked wrath in the eye. You looked it straight in its snarling, seductive face and said, "Not like this." Not because they didn't deserve it. They did. They still do. But because you deserved peace more than they deserved punishment. You realized that burning them down wouldn't rebuild you, that their ruin would not resurrect the pieces of you they tried to kill. You realized that becoming the monster they always feared would still be letting them define you. And you were never meant to be defined by their smallness. You are not the sum of your enemies. You are not the reflection of their cruelty. You are not the vessel for their karma. You are something more, something greater, something they could never touch, never diminish, no matter how much they tried. So you stood there, at the very edge of destruction, fire dripping from your fingers, anger crackling like electricity in your veins, and you chose differently. You chose the harder path, the braver path, the path that demanded strength beyond rage, the path that demanded restraint and wisdom, and a kind of savage grace they will never understand. You stood there with fire in your hands, and you didn't throw it. You could have, but you didn't. And in that moment, you became something they will never be, free. Strength is not loud. It is not a roar. It is not the smashing of glass or the burning of bridges. Real strength is a blade sheathed, a fire contained, a storm that rages inside but never tears the world apart. Real strength is choosing not to swing when every bone in your body screams for war. Real strength is holding the weight of destruction in your hands and laying it gently at your feet. You know that now. You wear that knowledge like armor, invisible to the world, but heavy on your skin. They thought your silence was weakness. They mistook your mercy for softness. They thought that because you didn't strike, you didn't know how. They thought that because you didn't retaliate, you couldn't. They had no idea how heavy restraint is. They had no idea what it cost you to hold the fire instead of unleashing it. They had no idea how many nights you sat in the quiet, fists clenched, breathing through the ache of wanting revenge so badly You could taste the blood of it on your tongue. Mercy is heavier than wrath. Forgiveness is heavier than fire. Self-mastery is a weight few can bear, and even fewer can carry with grace. But you carried it. You carry it still. You could have chosen to be like them. You could have chosen to speak their language, smallness, cruelty, betrayal. You could have sunk to their level, waged war in the dirt they dragged you through. You could have let their actions mold you, twist you, reshape you into a weapon. You could have become exactly what they accused you of being. But you didn't. You stood above it, above them, above the endless cycle of harm and hurt and hollow victories. You chose something rarer, something more terrifying than any revenge they could have imagined. You chose to remain yourself. Do you realize what that means? It means they didn't win. It means they did everything they could, threw every knife, whispered every lie, betrayed every trust, and still they couldn't corrupt you. Still they couldn't turn you into them. Still they couldn't strip you of your light, your dignity, your fire. You mastered the hardest art of all, the art of restraint. You became the warrior who does not need to draw his sword to be feared, the storm that does not need to break to be respected, the fire that burns silently, steadily, refusing to be wasted on the unworthy. There is a pride that comes with that, a deep, unshakable pride. Not the pride of ego, but the pride of survival, the pride of integrity, the pride of standing in the ruins they left you in, and choosing to build again, not destroy. Choosing to rise, not retaliate. Choosing to breathe, not burn. They will never understand it. People who thrive on hurting others cannot fathom a strength that does not seek to hurt in return. They will never understand how much power it took for you to walk away. How much will it took to put down the sword you had every right to swing? How much courage it took to turn your back on vengeance, even when it would have been justified? They will never understand because they are still ruled by their fears, their wounds, their smallness. But you are not. You chose to hold your power, not to waste it. You chose to be better, not bitter. You chose to rise, not to rot. You could have burned their names into the ground. You could have shattered their carefully crafted illusions. You could have ruined them so thoroughly they would have never recovered. But you didn't. And that will haunt them longer than any fire ever could, because now, every time they think of you, they are forced to confront the truth. That they could not break you, that they could not provoke you, that their worst wasn't enough to bring out the worst in you. They are left alone with their actions, left alone with the weight of their betrayals, left alone with the knowledge that mercy was extended to them, and they didn't deserve it. You let them live with what they did. That is a heavier sentence than fire, and you walk forward, you walk lighter, you walk freer, you walk with your head high and your heart intact. Because true power isn't in the hand that strikes, it's in the hand that holds steady, and you are steady, you are unbroken, you are something they will spend the rest of their lives trying and failing to understand. There comes a moment, quiet, unmarked, unseen by the crowd, where you realize you have become something they will never touch, not because you shouted louder, not because you swung harder, but because you stood in the aftermath of everything they tried to destroy, and you began to build, not rebuild what was lost. No, something entirely new, something they wouldn't recognize even if they stared it full in the face. You didn't just rise from the ashes, you learned to forge your own fire. You moved in silence, discipline etched into every step, pain hammered into resilience, Betrayal shaped into wisdom, every scar, every wound, every whispered lie they planted inside you, melted down and reforged into a weapon of quiet endurance. While they stayed trapped in their small wars, you outgrew the battlefield entirely. They stayed petty. You grew disciplined. They stayed bitter. You grew focused. They stayed afraid. You grew powerful. You are what they never had the courage to become. They clung to their need for revenge, for validation, for empty victories. But you chose the long road, the lonely road, the road that demanded everything and promised nothing. You chose to climb mountains no one would see, to fight battles no one would cheer, to build empires no one would believe in, until they stood trembling before the evidence of what you created. You became the phoenix, not just rising, but choosing the flames, not waiting for rebirth, but forging it with your bare hands. And it wasn't easy. God, it wasn't easy. There were nights you almost gave in, nights when the loneliness wrapped around your throat like a noose, nights when the old wounds whispered that it would be easier to burn it all down, to scream into the void, to demand the world's attention with your rage. But you didn't. You held the line. You chose to rise with honor. And in that choice, in that brutal, thankless choice, you separated yourself from them forever. Because anyone can tear down. Anyone can destroy when they're angry enough, wounded enough, desperate enough. But few, so very few, can endure the temptation to annihilate and instead choose to create. You chose discipline when chaos would have been easier. You chose patience when retaliation would have felt sweeter. You chose vision when short-term vengeance beckoned you like a siren song. You chose to become, not despite what they did to you, but because of it. Every time they doubted you, you planted deeper roots. Every time they mocked you, you sharpened your focus. Every time they left you bleeding, you stitched yourself back together with thread spun from your own damn will. You are not a survivor. You are not merely someone who endured. You are a builder, a creator, a force they cannot fathom because they were never brave enough to become anything greater than their pain. They lashed out. You leveled up. They crumbled under the weight of their hatred. You carried your scars like trophies and kept climbing. They told stories about your silence, about your fall, about your supposed defeat. And all the while, you were building something they could never touch. A life, a strength, a legacy. They will say you changed. They will say you became cold. They will say you forgot who you were. But you know the truth. You didn't forget who you were. You finally became it. You grew into the person they prayed you would never realize you could be. You became sovereign over your own destiny. And now, standing on the ground you built with blood and patience and relentless will, you can look back, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with a steady, quiet pride. You could have broken the world. Instead, you rebuilt your own. And that will echo longer, louder, stronger than any act of destruction ever could. You didn't shout. You didn't fight. You didn't tear down their walls or storm their gates or burn their names into the ground. No, you did something far worse. You disappeared. You left their world untouched, but you left it empty. And they don't understand it at first. They don't understand how silence can echo louder than a scream, how absence can weigh more than 1,000 accusations, how the person they thought they could break simply slipped away, untouchable, unreachable, unforgiving in the quietest way. You didn't need to ruin them. They ruined themselves the moment they realized you weren't coming back. Every room they walk into, every mirror they face, every quiet hour they try to fill, they hear it. The absence, The hollow ring where your loyalty used to be. The emptiness where your trust used to stand. You didn't have to haunt them. Their own guilt did the job better than any revenge ever could. Because guilt is patient. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't scream for attention. It lingers. It festers. It grows in the silence you left behind. They remember the way you looked at them when the knives slid in. They remember the words you never said, the fury you never unleashed, the destruction you could have chosen and didn't. They remember. And that memory weighs more than anything you could have done. You didn't swing the sword. You didn't burn the bridge. You didn't drag them through the dirt. And because you didn't, they are left dragging themselves through it over and over again.